Sarah stood frozen in the massive entrance hall, her worn shoes sinking into carpet so thick it felt like walking on clouds. The mansion stretched out before her, a place bigger than any building she had ever been inside except maybe the community college or the downtown library. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, throwing rainbow sparkles across marble floors and walls covered in artwork that probably cost more than she would earn in her lifetime. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor, the banister polished to a gleam that reflected her stunned face. Sarah clutched her small suitcase, the only one she owned, tighter against her chest, as the strange man who had driven her here placed the last of her belongings, just 2 more bags. "Mr. Richards will be home shortly, ma'am," the driver said with a slight bow before walking back out the massive front doors. Sarah couldn't move. This had to be some kind of mistake. This couldn't be James's house. Not the James she had married just 3 days ago. The kind man who wore simple clothes and drove a regular car, who she met at the community center where she volunteered. Not the James who had waited patiently as she finished her evening shift at the diner before their dates, who never made her feel bad about her worn dresses, or the fact that she lived in a tiny apartment in the poorest part of town. Not her James. But the driver had brought her here, to this palace, after James texted her the address where she should meet him after her last day at work. He had said he had a surprise for her, that they wouldn't be living in her little apartment as they had planned. She had assumed he meant he had found them a nicer place, maybe a small house to rent in a better neighborhood. Not this. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands, ready to call James and tell him there had been a mistake, when she heard a car pull up outside. Through the massive windows beside the door, she saw a sleek black car stop at the front entrance. Then James, her husband of 3 days, stepped out wearing a suit that looked nothing like the simple clothes he had always worn around her. He said something to the driver. When he walked in and saw her standing there, he smiled the same warm smile she had fallen in love with. But now that smile seemed to belong to a stranger. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Really?" 6 months earlier, Sarah Jones hurried through the evening rain, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. The forecast hadn't mentioned rain, but she couldn't afford a smartphone with weather updates, and the ancient flip phone in her pocket only made calls and sent texts. Her worn sneakers splashed through puddles as she rushed to make it to the community center before they closed. She needed to sign up for the free computer class they offered. Without better skills, she'd never find a job that paid more than the diner where she'd been waitressing for the past 3 years. At 28, Sarah was tired of struggling, tired of counting pennies and choosing between paying the electric bill or buying enough food, tired of working double shifts that left her feet aching and her back screaming in pain. Tired of lying awake at night wondering if she'd ever break free from poverty, the same poverty that had claimed her mother's health and eventually her life. By the time Sarah reached the community center, her clothes were soaked, her short, curly hair dripping water down her neck. She pulled open the heavy door and stepped into the warm, bright building, sighing with relief. "We're about to close," called a voice from behind the reception desk. "Please," Sarah said, approaching quickly. "I just need to sign up for the computer class. I finished work late and couldn't get here sooner." The woman behind the desk looked at her watch and frowned. "The office staff has gone home. There's no one to process your registration." Sarah's shoulders slumped. The next session wouldn't start for 2 months, and she had finally arranged her work schedule to have those evenings free. "Is there any way? Please, I really need this class." "I can help her," said a deep voice from behind her. Sarah turned to see a tall man with warm brown eyes and a kind smile. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he carried a stack of papers. "James," the receptionist said, "you're still here?" Just finishing up some paperwork for the youth program, he said. Then turned to Sarah. I volunteer here. Relief washed over Sarah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. James led her to a small office and gestured for her to sit while he turned on a computer. Which class were you interested in? The basic computer skills one, Sarah said, trying not to drip water all over the chair. I know a little, but not enough to get a better job. James nodded as he typed. It's a good class. I've sat in on it a few times. He glanced up at her, his eyes taking in her wet clothes and exhausted expression.
Rough day?
Something about his kind eyes made Sarah feel like she could be honest. Rough few years, actually, but I'm working on making things better. James smiled, and for a moment, Sarah forgot about being wet and tired and poor. His smile lit up his whole face and made her feel like things might actually be okay. That's the first step, he said. Deciding things can be better. He printed out a form and handed it to her with a pen. As Sarah filled out the form, she noticed James looking at her with interest. Not the kind of interest she was used to from men sizing her up like she was something to consume and discard, but genuine interest, like he wanted to know more about her as a person. When she handed the form back, their fingers brushed, and Sarah felt a small spark that surprised her. James seemed to feel it too, because his smile faltered for a moment before returning even warmer than before. You're all set, he said, putting the form in a folder. The class is Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6 to 8 p.m. Thank you, Sarah said, standing. You saved me from waiting another 2 months. James stood too, happy to help. He hesitated. There's a nice place just down the street. Sarah froze. She hadn't dated in years, too busy just trying to survive. And men like James, educated, well-spoken, clearly doing better in life than she was, they didn't usually look twice at women like her. I don't know, she said hesitantly. I work a lot. Just as friends, James said quickly. I volunteer here because I believe in helping people build better lives. Maybe I could help you figure out some next steps after your computer class. Sarah looked at him skeptically. Just friends? James nodded, his expression open and honest. Just friends. No pressure. Sarah thought about it. She could use a friend, especially one who knew more about jobs and opportunities than she did. Okay. Friends? James's smile widened. Great. How about Saturday morning? The coffee shop opens at 9. I work the breakfast shift at the diner, Sarah said, but I'm off at 2. Coffee at 2:30 then? Sarah nodded. That works. Thank you again for helping me with the class. As she walked back out into the rain, which had lessened to a drizzle, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a small spark of hope. That coffee meeting turned into another, and then dinner the following week. Despite her initial resistance, Sarah found herself looking forward to seeing James. He was different from any man she had ever known, kind, patient, genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams. He never made her feel small for working at a diner or living in a tiny apartment. Instead, he encouraged her to talk about her goals and the things she loved. What would you do if money wasn't an issue? He asked her one evening as they walked through the park after dinner at a simple but nice restaurant that James insisted on paying for as friends. Sarah laughed. Money is always an issue. Humor me, James said, his hand occasionally brushing against hers as they walked. If you could do anything, be anything, what would it be? Sarah thought about it. No one had ever asked her that before. I'd own a small bookstore, she said finally. Nothing fancy, just a cozy place with good books and maybe a little coffee corner where people could sit and read for a while. I'd have reading programs for kids from neighborhoods like mine, where books are a luxury. James looked at her with such warmth that Sarah felt herself blushing. That sounds perfect, he said. You'd be good at that. What about you? Sarah asked. What would you do if money wasn't an issue? A strange expression crossed James's face, but it was gone so quickly Sarah thought she might have imagined it. "I'd help people," he said simply. "People who just need a chance to make their lives better." As the weeks passed, Sarah and James's friendship deepened. He helped her practice for job interviews and even loaned her his old laptop so she could work on her computer skills at home. Sarah began to feel things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope for the future, and something more complicated for James. It was 3 months after they met when James finally kissed her. They had been celebrating Sarah's completion of the computer class with ice cream cones in the park. And as the summer sun set, casting golden light across the grass, James had looked at her with those warm eyes and leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to back away if she wanted to. She didn't want to. The kiss was gentle and sweet, and when James pulled back, his expression was a mix of joy and nervousness that made Sarah's heart skip. "I know we said just friends," he said softly, "but I've wanted to do that since the day I met you." Sarah smiled. "Me too." After that, they were officially dating, though not much changed except that now they held hands and shared kisses that grew more passionate as the weeks went by. James never pushed for more, always following Sarah's lead, always treating her with a respect she wasn't used to receiving. Sarah noticed odd things sometimes. James never invited her to his place, always meeting her at her apartment or somewhere in town. How he sometimes got phone calls that made him step away to talk in private. How he seemed to know a lot about business and finance for someone who claimed to work as a regular office worker. But whenever she asked, he would give simple explanations that made sense, and his behavior was always so consistent, so genuinely caring, that Sarah pushed her questions aside. 5 months after they met, on a cool autumn evening, James took Sarah to the community center where they had first met. He had arranged for them to have dinner on the roof, which had been transformed with string lights and flowers. A small table was set for 2, with candles flickering in the breeze. "How did you arrange this?" Sarah asked, amazed by the beautiful setup. James smiled. "I know people." They ate a simple but delicious meal that James had prepared himself, and as they finished dessert, James reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "Sarah," he said, his voice more serious than she had ever heard it, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You are the most real, the most genuine person I've ever known. You work harder than anyone I've ever met, and you never complain. You care about others even when you have so little for yourself." Sarah felt tears threatening to fall. No one had ever seen her this way, had ever valued her struggles and her strength. James slid out of his chair and, still holding her hand, knelt beside her. "I love you, Sarah Jones. I love your strength, your kindness, your dreams. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring with a small diamond that caught the candlelight. Sarah stared at him in shock. They had only known each other for 5 months. They had never even discussed marriage. And yet, she knew with absolute certainty that she loved this man, that he was unlike anyone she had ever met. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I'll marry you." James slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James pressed his forehead to hers. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "But not yet. After we're married. I promise it's nothing bad. Just something I've been waiting for the right time to share." Sarah looked into his eyes, saw nothing but love and honesty there, and nodded. "Okay. After we're married." They decided on a simple courthouse wedding. Just 3 weeks later, Sarah wore the nicest dress she owned, a blue one she had bought on sale for job interviews. James wore a suit that Sarah thought must be new, though he claimed he'd had it for years. Their only guests were two of Sarah's friends from the diner and a couple people from the community center. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah felt a happiness she had never believed possible for someone like her. They spent their wedding night in a nice hotel downtown, a splurge that James insisted on, making love with a tenderness that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The next morning, James told her that he had a new place for them to live, not her tiny apartment as they had planned. He had to go take care of some business, he said, but he would send a car for her after she finished her last shift at the diner. She had put in her 2 weeks' notice after they got engaged, planning to look for an office job with her new computer skills. "Pack everything," James said, kissing her goodbye. "We're starting fresh." Sarah worked her final shift in a daze of happiness, saying goodbye to coworkers she had known for years, accepting their well wishes and small gifts. Then she went home and packed her few belongings, wondering what kind of apartment or small house James had found for them. When the sleek black car arrived, driven by a man in a uniform who addressed her as Mrs. Richards, Sarah was confused but assumed James had arranged some kind of special transportation as part of the surprise. It was only when they drove into the wealthiest part of town, past gates that opened automatically, and up a long driveway to a mansion that Sarah began to realize something was very wrong, or very, very different than she had ever imagined. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. James looked at her with the same eyes she had fallen in love with, but now she saw uncertainty there too. He stepped closer, slowly, as if afraid she might run. "I'm still me," he said softly. "I'm still the man who fell in love with you that rainy evening at the community center. The man who loves how your nose crinkles when you laugh. The man who knows you take your coffee with 2 sugars and a lot of cream. The man who promised to love you for the rest of his life just 3 days ago. But all this," Sarah gestured around at the mansion's grand entrance hall. "You lied to me." James winced. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing." Sarah's voice rose. "You let me believe you were a regular person with a regular job. You watched me count pennies to pay my electric bill. You let me treat you to dinner at that cheap pizza place when I got my bonus at the diner. And it probably cost less than your socks." James looked down at his suit, then back at Sarah. "I wanted you to love me for me, not for this." He gestured around at the house. "Not for my money or what I could give you." "So you tricked me?" Sarah shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "How am I supposed to trust anything now?" James took another step toward her. "Sarah, please, let me explain everything. If you still want to leave after that, I'll understand. I'll give you a divorce and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. But please, just listen first." Sarah looked at him, at the man she had fallen in love with, who now seemed like a stranger. But his eyes were the same, and despite her anger and confusion, she still loved him. "Fine, explain." James led her to a sitting room off the main hall, a space that was beautiful but less overwhelming, with comfortable furniture and a warm fireplace. He sat beside her on a couch, close but not touching, respecting her need for space. "My full name is James Edward Richards III, he began. "My grandfather started a technology company that my father built into an empire. I grew up with everything I could ever want, except real connections. People always wanted something from me: money, my influence, a job, a donation to their cause. I never knew if people liked me or for what I could do for them." James ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that made Sarah's heart ache despite her anger. "I started volunteering at community centers in different parts of the city, using just my first name. I wanted to help people, but I also wanted to be around people who didn't know who I was, who would treat me like a regular person." He looked at Sarah. "That day you came in, soaking wet but determined to sign up for that class. I was impressed by you before we even spoke. And then when we talked, you were so genuine, so real. You didn't try to impress me or put on an act. You were just you, beautiful and strong and honest. So you decided to lie to me? Sarah asked, but some of the anger had left her voice. I didn't plan to, James said. At first, I just didn't mention my family or my money because it didn't seem relevant to our friendship. But the more I got to know you, the more I fell in love with you, and the more afraid I became of losing what we had. He reached for her hand, and when she didn't pull away, he continued, I've seen what money does to relationships. I've seen friends date people who only wanted them for their wealth. I've been used before, and it broke something in me. I needed to know that wasn't why you were with me. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the simple engagement ring on her finger that she now realized probably cost more than she had earned in the past year. You could have told me before we got married. I was going to, James said. I planned to tell you tonight after bringing you here. I wanted you to see all of this and understand that while it's part of my life, it's not who I am. He squeezed her hand gently. The man you fell in love with, the man who volunteers at community centers, who believes in hard work and helping others, who loves simple dinners and walks in the park, that's the real me, Sarah. The money, this house, the family business, those are just things I was born into. Sarah pulled her hand away and stood up, needing to move, to think. She walked to the window and looked out at the manicured gardens, trying to process everything. I understand why you're angry, James said from behind her. You have every right to be. I should have told you sooner. But I need you to know that every moment we've shared, every conversation, every kiss, it was all real. I never pretended to be someone I'm not. I just didn't show you all of who I am. Sarah turned to look at him. How can I believe that? How can I believe anything now? James stood slowly. Because you know me, Sarah. In all the ways that matter, you know me. You know my heart, my values, my dreams. Those didn't change just because you found out I have money. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. He was wearing expensive clothes now, standing in an expensive house, but his eyes were the same. The way he held himself, slightly hunched, as if trying to take up less space in the world, that was the same too. The nervous way he ran his hand through his hair when he was upset, that hadn't changed. I need time, she said finally, to think about all this. James nodded. Of course. This house has 20 bedrooms. You can have whichever one you want, or if you prefer, I can arrange for you to stay somewhere else while you decide what you want to do. Sarah shook her head. I'll stay here, but I need space. Whatever you need, James said. I'll have Mrs. Hershey's, the housekeeper, show you to a room. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk again. Sarah nodded, then remembering something, looked down at her worn clothes and scuffed shoes, feeling suddenly very out of place. I don't belong here, James. Look at me. James stepped closer, stopping just in front of her. You belong wherever you want to belong, Sarah. If you decide you want to belong here with me, then nothing else matters. Not your clothes. Not your background. Not my money. Just us. He reached out as if to touch her face, then stopped himself. I love you. That hasn't changed. Sarah looked into his eyes, saw the sincerity there, and felt some of her anger begin to fade. I love you too, she admitted. But I'm hurt and confused, and I need time. James nodded, then called for Mrs. Harris, who appeared so quickly Sarah wondered if she had been waiting just outside the door. The older woman, dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, smiled warmly at Sarah. Mrs. Richards, welcome home, she said. Let me show you to a room where you can rest. Sarah followed Mrs. Harris up the grand staircase, leaving James standing alone in the sitting room, looking lost and afraid in a way that money couldn't fix. The room Mrs. Harris showed her to was bigger than Sarah's entire apartment. The king-sized bed looked like it could fit 6 people, and the bathroom had a tub big enough to swim in. The closet was empty except for a few basic items that Mrs. Harris said had been purchased for her until you can go shopping. Mr. Richards said you might need some time to adjust, Mrs. Harris said kindly. He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. Sarah looked around the opulent room. This is a lot. Mrs. Harris nodded understandingly. It can be overwhelming at first. I've worked for the Richards family for 30 years, since James was a little boy. He's always been different from the rest of them kinder, more grounded. Sarah glanced at the older woman. You know him well? As well as anyone can, Mrs. Harris said. He's a private person, our James. Always has been. When his parents were alive, they were always trying to push him into high society, wanting him to marry some debutante from their circle. But James was never interested in that world. Sarah sat on the edge of the enormous bed. So his parents are. They died in a boating accident 5 years ago, Mrs. Harris said. James was devastated. He withdrew even more after that. Started spending more and more time at those community centers. Less and less time here. She smiled gently at Sarah. Until he met you, I haven't seen him this happy in years. Sarah looked down at her hands. He lied to me. Mrs. Harris made a small sound that wasn't quite agreement. He didn't show you all of his life. That's true. But from what he's told me about your time together, he never pretended to be someone he's not. The James you know is the real James. The money, this house that's just window dressing. With that, Mrs. Harris excused herself, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She spent the rest of the evening exploring the room, taking a long bath in the enormous tub, and trying to reconcile the James she knew with this new information about his life. The next morning, there was a gentle knock at her door. When Sarah opened it, she found James standing there, dressed in the simple jeans and button-down shirt she was used to seeing him in. I thought maybe we could talk, he said. Or if you're not ready, that's okay too. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. Without the expensive suit, he looked like her James again. We can talk. James suggested they walk in the gardens, and Sarah agreed, glad to be somewhere that felt less overwhelming than inside the mansion. They walked in silence for a while, the autumn air cool but pleasant. I've been thinking about what you said, Sarah finally spoke. About wanting me to love you for you, not your money. James nodded, waiting for her to continue. I understand that, Sarah said. But what you don't understand is what it feels like to be on the other side. To feel like you weren't trusted with the truth. To feel like maybe you were some kind of experiment. James stopped walking, turning to face her with distress clear on his face. You were never an experiment, Sarah. Never. Then what was I? Sarah asked. A charity case? The poor girl you could help by teaching her computer skills and buying her dinner? No, James said firmly. You are the woman I fell in love with because of your strength, your determination, your kindness. The way you treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are. The way you work so hard without complaining. The way you light up when you talk about your dreams. He took a deep breath. The truth is, you reminded me of who I want to be. Someone who makes a difference not because of money or power, but because of who they are as a person. Sarah looked at him, saw the earnestness in his eyes, and felt some of her doubts begin to fade. I still don't understand why you couldn't tell me before we got married. James ran a hand through his hair. I was afraid, he admitted. Every time I thought about telling you, I imagined you looking at me differently, treating me differently. Or worse, thinking I had been playing some kind of game with you. I kept waiting for the perfect moment, and then suddenly we were getting married, and I thought I could tell you after, when you already knew how much I loved you. He shook his head. It was cowardly, and I'm sorry. Sarah thought about everything about the months they had spent together, about the man she had fallen in love with, about the life she had thought they would have versus the reality now before her. "I need to know something," she said. "If I decide this isn't what I want, this life, would you be willing to live simply? To move into a regular house in a regular neighborhood? To live on a budget?" James didn't hesitate. "Yes, in a heartbeat. The only thing I'm not willing to give up is you." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "And what about your work? Your family business?" "I run most of it remotely anyway," James said. "I go into the office maybe once a week. The rest of the time I'm working from wherever I want to be. That's why I could spend so much time volunteering. I have good people who handle the day-to-day operations." He took her hand gently. "Sarah, I meant what I said yesterday. If you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. But if there's any chance you still want US, I'll do whatever it takes to make it work. Live wherever you want to live." Sarah looked at their joined hands. "I don't know what I want yet. This is all so overwhelming." James nodded. "Take all the time you need." They continued walking through the gardens, talking more openly now about James's life, his childhood, the reality of his wealth and position. Sarah asked questions, and James answered honestly, holding nothing back. Over the next few days, they fell into a strange routine. They ate meals together, talked for hours, even watched movies in the mansion's home theater. James showed Sarah around the property, introduced her to the staff, and tried to help her feel comfortable. But at night, they slept in separate rooms, Sarah still needing space to process everything. One evening, a week after Sarah had arrived at the mansion, she found James in the library, working on his laptop. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting up with hope. "James," Sarah said, sitting across from him, "I've been thinking a lot." James closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "About us?" Sarah nodded. "About us. About all of this." She gestured around the room. "I grew up with nothing. My mom worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. When she got sick, we couldn't afford good health care, and she died when I was 20. Since then, I've been on my own, working just to survive." James listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "The idea of having all this," Sarah continued, "it's not just overwhelming. It's scary. Like I don't deserve it. Like I'm an imposter who's going to be found out." "You deserve everything good in life," James said softly. Sarah smiled slightly. "Maybe. But the point is, I didn't fall in love with your money. I fell in love with you. The man who helped me sign up for a computer class. The man who listened to my dreams. The man who treated me with respect when so many others didn't." She took a deep breath. "I'm still hurt that you didn't tell me sooner. I still feel like you should have trusted me with the truth before we got married. But I understand why you were afraid. And I believe you when you say the man I knew is the real you." Hope bloomed in James's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I still love you," Sarah said, "and I want to try to make this work. But I need you to promise me something." "Anything," James said immediately. "No more secrets," Sarah said firmly. "No matter how afraid you are of my reaction, you tell me the truth." James nodded solemnly. "I promise. No more secrets. And one more thing," Sarah added. "I need to find my place in this world, your world. I can't just be the poor girl you rescued. I need to contribute something, to have my own purpose." "What do you want to do?" James asked. "Whatever it is, I'll support you completely." Sarah thought about it. "Remember when I told you about wanting to open a bookstore? A place with reading programs for underprivileged kids?" James nodded, smiling. "I remember. I still want that," Sarah said. "Not as a fantasy, but as something real. Something I build myself, with my own work. You can help me learn the business side of things, but I need it to be mine." James's smile widened. I think that's a wonderful idea, and I know just the Buildinga storefront downtown that the company owns. It used to be a bookstore years ago, before the chain stores drove it out of business. It's been sitting empty. It could be yours, to do with as you want. Sarah felt excitement bubble up inside her. Really? Really, James said. We can go look at it tomorrow if you'd like. Sarah stood and moved around the desk to where James sat. She leaned down and kissed him softly, for the first time since discovering the truth about his life. Thank you for understanding. James stood and wrapped his arms around her. Thank you for giving Megaving you another chance. That night, Sarah moved her things into the master bedroom, joining James in the space that was meant to be theirs together. As they lay in bed, Sarah curled against James's side. She realized that while the room was grand and the bed ridiculously large, being with James felt the same as it had in her tiny apartment. The warmth of his body, the sound of his heartbeat, the way he held her like she was the most precious thing in his world, none of that had changed. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the middle of her bookstore, New Chapter Books, on opening day. The space had been transformed from an empty storefront to a warm, inviting haven for book lovers. Comfortable chairs were scattered throughout, shelves were filled with carefully selected books, and a small coffee counter in the corner offered drinks and simple snacks. James had helped her with the business plan and initial funding, but Sarah had made all the decisions about the store's design and inventory. She had hired staff from the community, including several young people from her old neighborhood who needed job opportunities, and she had set up a reading program that offered free books and literacy support to underprivileged children. As she watched customers browse the shelves, Sarah felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that had nothing to do with her husband's wealth. This was her dream made real through her own hard work and vision. "It's perfect," James said, coming up beside her and slipping an arm around her waist. He was dressed in his usual simple clothes, looking like any other supportive husband on his wife's big day. "It is, isn't it?" Sarah said, leaning into him. "Thank you for believing in me." "Always," James said, kissing the top of her head. The past 6 months had been a journey of adjustment for both of them. Sarah had gradually grown more comfortable with the realities of James's wealth. They had moved out of the mansion and into a comfortable but modest house in a good neighborhood, one that Sarah had chosen because it felt like a home, not a showpiece. James still ran his company, but he had restructured things to allow more time for what he truly loved: helping others through his volunteer work and supporting Sarah's dreams. They traveled occasionally, seeing parts of the world Sarah had never imagined visiting, but they always came back to the life they were building together, a life balanced between James's world of privilege and Sarah's world of practical reality. And every night, no matter where they were or what they were doing, they talked honestly and openly about their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. The trust that had been damaged by James's omission had been rebuilt, stronger than before. "I have another surprise for you," James said as the opening day crowd began to thin. "But this one I think you'll like." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "No more mansions, I hope?" James laughed. "No, nothing like that. Come with me." He led her to the back of the store, to a door she hadn't noticed before. It was tucked between 2 tall bookshelves, almost hidden. "What's this?" Sarah asked, confused. She had designed every inch of the store and didn't remember this door. James smiled mysteriously and handed her a key. "Open it and see." Sarah took the key and unlocked the door. It swung open to reveal a small, perfectly furnished children's reading room. The walls were painted with scenes from classic children's books: A Wild Rumpus from Where the Wild Things Are, The Tea Party from Alice in Wonderland, The Little House on the Prairie. Small chairs and cushions were arranged in a circle, and shelves lined with children's books covered one wall. In the center was a special chair, storyteller's chair with a plaque that read, "The Elaine Jones Memorial Reading Room," in honor of Sarah's mother. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "James, I know how much your mom meant to you," James said softly. "How she read to you even when she was tired from working 3 jobs. How she instilled your love of books." Sarah turned and threw her arms around her husband, too overcome with emotion to speak. James held her tight, his own eyes damp with tears. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "It's perfect." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that rainy evening at the community center to this moment, standing in her own bookstore, with a room dedicated to her mother's memory. None of it would have happened if she hadn't taken a chance on friendship with a kind stranger, if she hadn't been willing to work for her dreams, if she hadn't been able to forgive and trust again after feeling betrayed. And James, looking at his wife's face glowing with happiness, thought about how close he had come to losing her by not trusting her with the truth from the beginning. He had been so afraid that his wealth would change how she saw him, that he had risked everything they had built together. He vowed never to make that mistake again, to always trust Sarah with every part of himself, just as she trusted him. 1 year after their wedding, Sarah sat in the storyteller's chair in the Elaine Jones Memorial Reading Room, a book open in her lap, and a circle of children from her old neighborhood sitting on cushions around her. She read with animation, doing different voices for each character, making the children giggle and gasp at all the right moments. From the doorway, James watched with a smile, still amazed by this woman who had walked into his life and changed everything. The bookstore was thriving under Sarah's management, becoming not just a business, but a community hub. The reading program for underprivileged children had expanded to 3 days a week, and they were talking about opening a second location in another underserved neighborhood. But more important than the success of the bookstore was the life they had built together. A life that balanced James's wealth with Sarah's practicality, his business acumen with her community spirit. They had found a way to make their different worlds mesh, creating something new and beautiful in the process. As Sarah finished the story and the children clapped, she looked up and saw James watching her. The love in his eyes made her heart skip, just as it had that first day at the community center. She smiled back at him, a private moment in the midst of the noisy, happy chaos of the reading room. Later that evening, as they walked home together, hand in hand, Sarah thought about how different her life was from what she had imagined it would be just a year and a half ago. She had gone from counting pennies to pay her electric bill to being married to a millionaire. But the most valuable thing she had gained wasn't material wealth, it was the love of a good man, the ability to pursue her dreams, and the chance to make a difference in her community. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, seeing the thoughtful expression on her face. "Just how life can surprise you," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "A year and a half ago, I was rushing through the rain to sign up for a computer class, hoping it might help me get a slightly better job. Now look at us." James smiled. "Best rainstorm of my life." They reached their house, the comfortable, modest home they had chosen together, and James unlocked the door. As they stepped inside, he turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "I have something to tell you," he said, "and I'm telling you right away because I promised no more secrets." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, worry flashing through her mind. "What is it?" James took both her hands in his. "I got a call from my doctor today. The test results came back." Sarah's worry deepened. James had gone for a routine physical the week before, but she hadn't known he was waiting for any test results. "Are you okay?" A slow smile spread across James's face. "I'm fine. Better than fine. The test confirmed that I'm going to be a father." For a moment, Sarah just stared at him, not comprehending. Then understanding dawned. You're pregnant, James confirmed, his eyes shining with joy. About 6 weeks along, according to the test. Sarah's hands flew to her stomach, a mixture of shock and happiness washing over her. But I didn't even know. I've been so busy with the store opening, I didn't notice. James laughed, pulling her into his arms. The doctor said that's not uncommon, especially with a first pregnancy. They want you to come in for a proper checkup, but everything looks good so far. Sarah looked up at her husband, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby, James repeated, his own eyes damp. That night, as they lay in bed talking about their future as parents, Sarah felt a contentment. From a struggling waitress to a bookstore owner, from a woman alone in the world to one surrounded by love, and now creating new life, her journey had been unexpected in every way. Do you ever regret it? She asked James softly. Marrying someone from such a different world? James propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. Regret marrying the strongest, kindest, most genuine person I've ever known? Not for a second. He placed a gentle kiss on her lips. What about you? Do you ever regret saying yes to the man who didn't tell you he was a millionaire until after the wedding? Sarah pretended to think about it, then grinned. Well, the mansion was a bit much, but I suppose the rest of the package makes up for it. James laughed and pulled her closer. I love you, Sarah Richards. I love you too, James Richards, Sarah replied, snuggling into his embrace. All three of us do. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah thought about the child growing inside her, a child who would have opportunities she had never dreamed of, but who she and James would make sure also understood the value of hard work, kindness, and giving back. A child who would know that love, not money, was what truly made a person rich. 4 months later, Sarah stood in what would soon be the nursery of their home, looking around at the half-finished space. The walls were painted a soft yellow, with white trim that James had insisted on installing himself despite having no previous experience with carpentry. The result was slightly uneven in places, but Sarah loved it all the more for that imperfection. James had thrown himself into preparing for the baby with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything he cared about. He had read every parenting book he could find, attended every doctor's appointment with Sarah, and spent hours researching the safest baby equipment. It made Sarah smile to see this powerful businessman so completely captivated by the tiny person they had created together. The sound of the front door opening and closing announced James's return from work. These days he spent more time at the office than he had when Sarah first met him, but she understood why. He was restructuring his company, setting things up so that when the baby came, he could take several months off to be home with them. Sarah? James called. In the nursery, she replied. James appeared in the doorway, a large package in his arms and a smile on his face. Special delivery. Sarah looked at the package curiously. What's that? Open it and see, James said, setting it down carefully on the floor. Sarah knelt down a bit awkwardly with her growing belly and opened the box. Inside was a beautiful wooden rocking chair, intricately carved with flowers and vines. Oh, James, she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's handmade by an artisan in your old neighborhood, James said. I found him through one of the kids in your reading program. His grandfather makes furniture, and when I saw his work, I knew it was perfect for the nursery. Sarah smiled up at her husband, still amazed by his thoughtfulness. Help me up so I can try it out? James held out his hands and pulled her gently to her feet. Sarah settled into the rocking chair, finding it perfectly comfortable, and began to rock slowly back and forth. What do you think? James asked. I think, Sarah said, placing her hands on her belly where their child was kicking energetically, that this is where I'll be spending many late nights with our little one. James knelt beside the chair and placed his hand next to hers, his face lighting up as he felt the baby kick. "He's strong." Sarah corrected with a smile. They had decided not to find out the baby's sex before birth, but each had their own feeling about it. "Either way," James said, looking up at Sarah with such love that it took her breath away, "this child is lucky to have you for a mother." Sarah leaned down to kiss him softly. "And you for a father." That evening, as they ate dinner together at their kitchen table, simple, homemade meal rather than anything fancy, Sarah watched James talking animatedly about the new charitable foundation he was setting up, one that would provide educational opportunities for underprivileged children. His passion for helping others, for using his wealth to make a difference, was one of the things she loved most about him. "I was thinking," Sarah said when James paused for breath, "about the baby's last name." James looked at her curiously. "Richards, right? Unless, did you want to use your maiden name?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I was thinking about the third part." James was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't think so," he said finally. "My father and grandfather were good men in many ways, but they were also very focused on wealth and status. I'd like our child to have their own identity, not be part of a numbered line." He reached across the table to take Sarah's hand. "Besides, our child will be something new, a blend of your world and mine. That deserves its own fresh start." Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I like that." Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Sarah's head on James's chest and his hand gently stroking her hair, she thought about how far they had come since that rainy day at the community center. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of hurt, but they had worked through each challenge together, growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. "Do you ever miss it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The mansion, the fancy cars, all of that?" James was silent for a moment, thinking. "Sometimes I miss the view from the balcony," he admitted. "And the home theater was pretty great." He kissed the top of her head. "But I don't miss the emptiness, the echo of my own footsteps in those huge rooms, the feeling that I was living in a museum rather than a home." He shifted so he could look into her eyes. "This house, with you, with our baby on the way, this is what I always wanted but didn't know how to find. A real home, a real family." Sarah smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. These pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything lately. "I love you," she whispered. "The real you, not the millionaire, not the businessman, just you, James." "And I love you," James replied, his hand moving to rest on her belly where their child grew. "Both of you." As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From struggling to survive, to finding love with a man who had everything except what he truly needed. From feeling alone in the world to creating a new family. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed. The day their daughter was born was the most terrifying and beautiful day of Sarah's life. After 20 hours of labor, with James by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her when she thought she couldn't push anymore, little Elaine Marie Richards came into the world with a powerful cry that made both her parents laugh through their tears. "She's perfect," James whispered, holding his tiny daughter in his arms with such careful tenderness that Sarah's heart felt like it might burst with love for both of them. "She is," Sarah agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "And she has your eyes." It was true. Though most newborns had blue-gray eyes that would change color in the months to come, little Elaine's eyes were already showing flecks of the warm brown that Sarah loved so much in James's eyes. The first few weeks with Elaine were a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and moments of such pure joy that Sarah sometimes found herself crying from the sheer, overwhelming beauty of it all. James was there for every moment. having taken a full 3 months off from work to be with his new family. He changed diapers, walked the floor with a fussy Elaine in the wee hours of the morning, and supported Sarah through the challenges of breastfeeding and recovery from childbirth. One evening, as Sarah nursed Elaine in the rocking chair in the nursery, she looked up to find James watching them from the doorway, his expression one of such love and wonder that it brought tears to her eyes. "What?" she asked softly, not wanting to disturb the half-asleep baby at her breast. "I was just thinking," James said, coming to kneel beside the chair, "about how close I came to missing all of this, if I hadn't been at the community center that evening. If you hadn't come in from the rain. If I had been too afraid to ask you for coffee." Sarah reached out one hand to touch his face. "But you were there. I did come in. You did ask me for coffee," she smiled. "And now we have Elaine." James leaned into her touch. "When I think about how I almost lost you by not being honest about who I was." "But you didn't lose me," Sarah reminded him gently. "I'm right here. We're right here, and we're not going anywhere." James nodded, then leaned forward to place a soft kiss on Elaine's downy head and another on Sarah's lips. He said, his voice filled with quiet wonder, "My real treasure." As Elaine grew from a newborn to an infant and then a chubby, laughing baby, Sarah and James found their rhythm as parents. Sarah had reopened the bookstore when Elaine was 3 months old, bringing the baby with her in a carrier. The customers loved seeing the baby, and the children in the reading program were especially fascinated by her. James went back to work but rearranged his schedule to be home by dinner time most days, and he still took Fridays off to have a special day with his daughter. Some of Sarah's favorite moments were watching James and Elaine together, the powerful businessman who could make million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, completely enchanted by a tiny girl who had him wrapped around her little finger. On Elaine's first birthday, they threw a simple party at their home, inviting friends from the community center, staff from the bookstore, and some of the families from the reading program. As Sarah watched James help Elaine blow out the single candle on her cake, she felt a contentment so deep it seemed to radiate from her very bones. Later that night, after Elaine was asleep and the house was quiet again, Sarah and James sat on the back porch, enjoying the warm summer evening and each other's company. "I got a call today," James said, his tone casual but with an undertone that caught Sarah's attention. "Oh? About what?" "The Richardson property," James said. "The one downtown that we looked at last month. They accepted our offer." Sarah's eyes widened. "Really? So we can open the second bookstore," James confirmed with a smile. "Your dream of expanding to another underserved neighborhood can happen now?" Sarah squeezed his hand, excitement bubbling up inside her. "That's wonderful! We can start the renovation next month, and maybe open by Christmas." James nodded, but there was something in his expression that told Sarah there was more. "What is it?" she asked. James took a deep breath. "There's something else I've been thinking about, something I want to ask you." Sarah looked at him curiously. "What?" "How would you feel about expanding our family as well as the business?" James asked, his eyes searching hers. "Giving Elaine a little brother or sister?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been thinking about the same thing recently, watching Elaine grow and realizing how much she loved being a mother. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." James's face lit up with joy. "Really?" Sarah laughed at his enthusiasm. "Really. But maybe we should wait until after the new store opens. I'm not sure I can handle morning sickness and construction at the same time." James pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that still took her breath away after more than 2 years together. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "More every day." "I love you too," Sarah replied, resting her forehead against his. "My unexpected millionaire." James chuckled at the nickname. "And I love you, my unexpected everything." As they sat there in the gathering darkness, wrapped in each other's arms and planning their future together, Sarah thought about the long, winding path that had brought them here. From strangers meeting on a rainy evening to parents planning their second child, from hiding the truth to living in complete honesty, from two separate worlds to one shared life. It wasn't the life she had expected, but it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. A life built not on wealth or status, but on love, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable with each other. And as stars appeared in the night sky above their home, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who had seen her, really seen her, from that very first day. The man who had shown her that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love.